Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites, like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies, like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
James Comey has had many roles over the course of his career. Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, U.S. Deputy Attorney General, General Counsel for Lockheed Martin and Bridgewater Associates. More recently, he's added mystery thriller author to that list. Last year, we got to speak with him just as his first novel, Central Park West, was released. It introduced readers to federal prosecutor Nora Carleton, who was working to convict organized crime figures in New York City. The book was a terrific read. Even though it was a fictional work, Comey packed it full of real-world details that could only come from someone who had himself actually prosecuted mobsters.
Now, Comey and Nora are back. In his new book, Westport, Nora finds herself in some new situations. Not only is she now working in corporate law, but she's also suspected of the murder of a colleague. If she wants to get out of this, she's going to have to turn to some old friends for help.
We really enjoyed the book, and we're excited when James Comey agreed to come back and chat with us on our show again. In this conversation, we talk about the new book, corporate law, white-collar crimes, and the challenge of finding people who will tell you when you suck. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is Money, Fear, and Truth, a conversation with Westport author James Comey. So to start out with, can you you've been on the show. I think the Murder Sheet listeners all know and love you, but can you go over your background again? I think people probably know you as the FBI director and certainly as a prosecutor, but we'd be also interested in learning about some of the inspiration behind your latest novel, Westport, and
Yeah.
how your experience influenced that.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me back. It's a thrill to be with both of you on the Murder Sheet. I spent most of my career as a federal prosecutor, as you said, in New York, in Manhattan, then in Richmond, Virginia. Then after 9/11, out of the blue, the Department of Justice asked me to go back to Manhattan and be the chief federal prosecutor. Then I became a boss, excuse me, at the Department of Justice. I was the deputy attorney general. And I left government in 2005 after some big fights inside the Bush administration over torture and electronic surveillance of American citizens. And I thought I had burned all possible bridges and would never be coming back. And so I went and worked for 5 years as the general counsel, so the chief lawyer at Lockheed Martin, which was in the DC area. And then I was recruited to become the general counsel at a big investment manager or hedge fund, huge hedge fund, the biggest in Westport, Connecticut. And then I left there after 3 years to teach at Columbia and thought that's what I would do. I would be an academic. And then out of the blue, they asked me to come interview with President Obama for FBI director. And I'm sorry to say your listeners probably know the rest of that story.
There you go. Absolutely. So your last novel, Central Park West, introduces us to Nora, who is in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. And the sequel, Westport, follows up with where she sort of ends up next. And I was wondering, can you just tell us a bit, in a nutshell, no spoilers, about Westport, this follow-up novel?
Nora, who is the protagonist, leaves the U.S. Attorney's Office, as you said, in Manhattan. And it's a little bit of inspired by my own chronology. Mine was different than hers, but she's better than I. She went from the U.S. Attorney's Office directly to be the chief lawyer, the general counsel at a big hedge fund, an investment manager in Westport, Connecticut. And she was burned out in New York and had been through difficult times that are captured in the first book. And so she saw this as an opportunity to do something different, to make a lot more money and to maybe live in a place that didn't have some of the pressures of the urban environment. So she thought, I'm going to a safer suburban environment to do a different kind of work. And then, without giving things away, life hits her fast. And the book opens, is not a spoiler, the book opens with the murder of an executive from that hedge fund. And Nora, believe it or not, is identified as a suspect. And so she has to deal with that and get help from some of the characters readers came to know in the first book, especially Benny Dugan, the organized crime investigator, who comes to work with Nora and help her as she's a target of an investigation.
Yeah, as you mentioned, she's actually the target of the investigation here. So she's in a different role than she was in the first book. What made you decide to put her in that kind of a different role?
I thought it would give the readers, through Nora's eyes, to see through the other end of the telescope. And after my collision with the Trump administration, I was investigated many times. Thank goodness none of it resulted in any kind of charges. And they even audited me, and I got a refund as a result of the audit. So I wanted to show a little bit of what it's like to be under that kind of microscope. And it gave me an opportunity to have Benny come and assist her in an environment very different than the one Benny is used to, trying to find truth in a totally different environment. I thought that will be, those two perspectives may be a lot of fun for readers in this whodunit.
And then I'm just curious, when you conceived of Nora in this series, did you always think you would switch over to the sort of corporate law angle early on? What made you decide to leave the U.S. Attorney's Office in this series? And, I guess I'd be curious, was that always the plan, or was that something that kind of came to you as you were writing the first one?
It was always the plan, and the plan is always my amazing spouses. Patrice envisioned, and then my job was to execute on her vision, 3 books that were Nora books, so a trilogy set in the New York area, and loosely paralleling my chronology. And she thought, and I agreed, it would be fun to take readers to a different environment, show them a different part of the world, and do it in a slightly different style. This is more of a whodunit, or sort of, I don't want to, these words coming out of my mouth make me cringe, Agatha Christie. But I am, although I noticed I'm next to Agatha Christie on many bookshelves, that is the only way in which I compare to Agatha Christie. But it would be fun to do that. And then in the third book, I'm taking the readers back into Manhattan and want to show them what a domestic terrorism investigation looks like and explore some of those themes which are pretty current in our country, unfortunately.
And then I'm interested, as you say, the book obviously is not autobiographical, but there's some similar experiences there. Nora transitions into private corporate practice. You did that too. What is that transition like, going from doing criminal prosecutions, New York City, to corporate law?
It's easy in some ways and hard. It's easy in that they pay you a ton more dough. And it's hard because you lose the sense of mission, that your job is to try and do something good every morning. Your job instead is to represent a client to the best of your ability and give them good advice. But it's different than being a prosecutor. And the other thing that I remember being struck by is the sense of competition that you don't feel in the government. In my private sector jobs, we would wake up every morning thinking, how are we beating our opponents, our competitors? Or how are we better than Boeing or Northrop Grumman today? Or in the investment manager world, how are we beating the market in a way that others are not? And how do we keep our customers happy? That's a sense that, for reasons that make sense, isn't there in the government. And so the dough makes it easier. The lack of a moral content to your mission makes it harder. And again, this is not about the place I worked, but I tried to capture some of that. And Nora struggles with that early on.
Absolutely. One thing I was curious on the flip side, how is it viewed in the government, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, when someone is sort of departing to do something new, go into corporate law, go into a new opportunity? Is there a sense of like, you're abandoning us, or is it more of like, this is to be expected, go fly, spread your wings?
It depends upon which U.S. Attorney's Office you're in. They're all different. And the Southern District of New York in Manhattan, and then probably the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn, both have a culture where young people come close out of law school and work like crazy and then leave after. It used to be they made you promise to stay 3 years because people might leave quicker than that. Now I would say the average tenure's gone up. But after 5 to 10 years, people ordinarily leave and go someplace. Now, how your colleagues feel about it kind of depends on where you go. If you go to a boring general counsel job like I did, they don't see you as joining the enemy. If you go to a criminal defense job right away, sometimes they're like, oh man, you're changing the color of your uniform so quickly. How can you betray us? But in those two offices, it's expected that people will leave. Other U.S. attorneys' offices of departure may strike them as stranger and draw more questions.
One thing that I think makes your books so special is because they do reflect your personal experiences, and it's the world you write about seems very real and lived in. And so I have a question that I think a lot of general readers have at least a basic understanding of what goes on in a U.S. attorney's office and sort of work they do there with prosecution. And maybe people in general don't have that kind of understanding about what it's like to go and put your suit on and go into a corporate law office. And you discuss that in the book. I just wondering, could you tell us, like, what is a typical day like in the life of a corporate law attorney?
You say put your suit on, but I guess in this case it'd be more like flannel and jeans and Nora's.
Right. And at Lockheed Martin, it was formal because I was right down the hall from the CEO. So it was a suit environment. But when I went to the investment management space, people were wearing T-shirts. I can remember my first day on the job. I didn't have any chairs in my office, just beanbags. And I'm 6'8", and so it's a hilarious thing to watch this giraffe try and get up and down from a beanbag. And I remember the guy in the office next to mine came in, and he was wearing flip-flops, no socks, so bare feet on flip-flops, tattered jeans, and like a purple Rock Band T-shirt. And he just came in. He was probably 24, And the goal of this particular employer was to eliminate hierarchy. And I try and capture themes like that, although it's different in the book. And so he just calling me dude and talking to me about and sitting on the beanbag chair. So it was a big adjustment for a stiff like myself. But the work is very similar in that as the general counsel, your job is to manage litigation that the company's involved in. So hire outside lawyers, make sure that your lawyers are serving their clients. You typically have lawyers who are associated with different parts of the business. So someone working with HR, someone working with the production operation of the business, make sure that they're doing what they need. And then the biggest role for the general counsel is to be the advisor for the leadership of the company. And that was, to me, the coolest part of the job. You got to sit with the company, both companies I worked at, and think about and talk about strategy and give both your best advice as a lawyer and sometimes be asked to give your best advice as a thinking person. And that made it fun.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug, ignored a leaky faucet, pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto! The car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
I was curious, one thing about Saugatuck. I'm saying that right?
Yeah.
Okay. That the firm in the book really does seem to try to put a high value on truth and anti-hierarchical measures, and do away with some of those hierarchies of money, power, and race and gender. But I mean, the book does make it clear that in a corporate culture that can be much easier said than done. And I guess, like, in your view, because that's such a theme in the book, is that possible in this modern world and in corporations? And is it even responsible or honest to try to act like it is?
A great question. It's something I've been obsessed with my whole career, including at the FBI. How do you create an environment where people will tell the truth to each other, especially to their leaders, especially when it's their leaders who are wrong about something or misunderstanding something? As a boss, how do you know that your people are telling you what's really going on? And so it can never be perfect because humans are never perfect. They're always governed by some fear or some set of biases, whether they acknowledge them or not. So there's always hierarchy. I used to tease people who were from Silicon Valley startups telling me, we're all equal here. And I would say, no, you're not. I don't care. I don't care that everyone's wearing hoodies and eating trail mix and drawing on a whiteboard. If there's someone in that room who owns a larger share of the company than someone else, the floor tilts up towards that person. There's always some form of hierarchy. And then obviously you mentioned some of the other normal forms of hierarchy, but it is possible to create environments where you're more likely to hear the truth, where you've flattened the floor more than it might otherwise be. And how to do that, how to build that kind of culture is the central challenge and central question for a leader. It's harder and harder the larger and older an organization is, because culture are the unspoken assumptions of a workplace that they're down in the basement and no one acknowledges them or talks about them, but it's sort of the way things are really done no matter what they tell you in training. And the older an organization is, the more there is in the basement, the more cultural understandings there are that no one can confront. And the harder it is to build that kind of environment. That was my challenge at the FBI. I mean, it's an organization devoted to finding the truth, but I can remember Bob Mueller saying to me when we were transitioning, he said, I'm going to have you be briefed by all the leaders of the divisions. I said, terrific. And he said, I'll have you meet one-on-one with them without me. I said, that's perfect. And then he said, and then after the meetings, I'll tell you what's really going on. And my reaction was, what the hell, Bob? But you mean these people are going to lie to me? And I didn't say that because I wasn't sure what he meant. But I think what he meant was people are going to lie to you, but they're not going to volunteer warts and weaknesses and failings. You have to find a way to build an environment where people will tell you the truth. And so I explore that in this book. You see it in my real world experience, the smaller, more entrepreneurial environments, like even though it's a big hedge fund with only hundreds of employees, or a Silicon Valley company with only hundreds of employees has a better shot at building that environment. But given the way people are, it will never be perfect. There will always be secrets.
Yeah, I think you, without giving away any spoilers, you definitely are adept at kind of delving into some of those human failings within this kind of titular firm, that you can certainly commit to transparency, but when it comes to people's lives, there's ways to get around that, I guess. And I was just curious, like, as far as the your time with the FBI, what were some of those other like basement level cultural things that you sort of uncovered while working there? That kind of, I mean, it's, as you said, it's such an old organization, it's such a storied organization. Imagine if it's an organization that, kind of has those cultural things that can be very static. And I was just curious, were there any other ones that you sort of ran up against?
Oh yeah, quite a few. But the most prominent were, it's a fear-based culture, born of the first 50 years of its life, when J. Edgar Hoover would fire people on a whim, and that your goal to be successful in the FBI was to do your work and not let the director find out what you're doing. And if you made a mistake, keep that from the director because it could cost you your job. Well, Hoover's been gone for 50 years, but that sense is still there and closely related, which is one of the reasons that the anonymous climate survey was so important to me as a leader at the FBI, because I had the best chance of having people tell me things, and I read hundreds of them. But the other thing that's closely related is the FBI is a face culture, almost like some traditional Eastern ethnic cultures. That is, what I mean by face culture is the gravest sin you could commit in the FBI is to contradict one of your colleagues in front of the director. And so imagine you're the director and you start to notice that people don't want to embarrass other people in front of the director. They don't want to, tell them privately that they made a mistake, and then the person will come back in and correct it, ideally. And so I had to build around that face culture, both by trying to get people to be more comfortable with me, and by things like I would always have my chief of staff sit at the other end of the room from me so that he could watch people's body language. And then I would always have him, after group meetings, follow everybody out in the hall and basically do surveillance. Listen, talk to people. So what didn't they tell the director? What went wrong in that meeting that nobody wanted to fix in front of the director? So that's both terrifying in a way, and given that it's a reality, it's really important for the leader to figure out how I can change that kind of culture at the margins. But it's, by the time I became FBI director, that culture is 80 years old. And so how I really would be overconfident to say, I'm going to change this I was there 4 years, but even if I were there 10 years, that I could change it in that period of time. So I need to try to change it and then build around it to maximize my chances of hearing the truth.
I'm curious, listening to you, it really seems to me that a lot of your career has been spent like basically trying to figure people out or how to reach people, whether it's you're investigating a crime or trying to figure out a way to make a jury respond and understand the information, or how to get people who you are leading to be honest with you. What kind of insights did you come to in terms of writing a novel and trying to figure out how to reach people and grab people?
Yeah, I hope I'm doing it. It is to be real, to show people and give them the sense as they're reading that they're reading how it really goes on, even though the places are fictional, that I'm giving people a sense that you can trust me because I'm going to show you what it's really like. I try to build characters that I care deeply about so that the readers will care about them. And I try to capture dialogue in a way that I can hear it in my head, and so that people can will be drawn into it, come to know these people. When they watch Nora and Benny speak, they'll feel the warmth and the playful tension between these people. And so that's a way of drawing the readers in and showing them a world in the way that I really have experienced it and that I remember it. I'm not writing memoir here, but I'm trying to capture a real sense of, what's the word, zeitgeist of places I've been, industries I've been in, and the kind of work that I've done.
One kind of story type that I always really like, and I think this is part of the reason why I really like your books, is like the idea of characters I like working together who are smart, trying to figure something out together. Often, if it's a murder mystery, even better. And I think that kind of is captured in this book, but also your previous books. There's often a real sense of sort of found family and community of people coming together, get together to like figure something out. And it kind of, in this novel, it even kind of goes into the corporate world of the kind of kibitz theory of like people coming together to be honest and do good work. And obviously, to the extent that the investment firm lives up to that is kind of questionable, but certainly to the extent of which Nora and her friends, Benny, Carmen, are able to come together to help her in her time of need, that seems to be sort of a theme in your work. And I guess I was just wondering if we can sort of unpack that, or kind of like, has that been like your experience in the work that you've done, where you kind of have to have that community and bring it to the forefront?
I think so. What I need to have fun in the work that I do. I need, fancier word is joy, I guess, but and when I think about what made it fun, what brought me joy, it was the people I was trying to do stuff with, the interesting characters that with whom I kind of did battle. And some of my fondest memories are, whispering at counsel table in the middle of a difficult trial, my trial partner passing me a funny Post-it note to break the tension, sitting and brainstorming hour after hour about how we're going to approach a particular witness or where the evidence might be that would help us unlock a particular subject. And so the work was wonderful. I especially liked the work trying to bring bad people to justice. But I think most of what I loved about it was the people I got to work with and what they cared about. I really enjoyed and learned a lot from my time in the investment management business, but I left because it wasn't much fun, that there wasn't enough laughter for me. There wasn't enough, because I didn't really love markets and investing, and my life is not organized around money, but I loved being with people. And one of the challenges when I went to Columbia, one of the challenges of being there was I was alone a lot. I didn't have a partner or partners to bang ideas around with or to have fun with while doing the work. And so I think you can hear me, I'm thinking out loud here because I don't think I've answered this question before, but you put your finger on something. It's the partners, the people I got a chance to do stuff with that made the work so fun.
So what's it like now? Because now you're no longer a part of an organization and you're writing these books by yourself, although I know your wife was a key component.
It can be lonely. And what's weird about me is I'm a bit of an introvert, right? I really don't want to be a public figure. I love being at home. I love being in the woods. But I also need, I don't think this makes me less of an introvert. I need those close relationships, right? You two do this together. I bet that's a source of joy for you. Yeah. Thank goodness I have Patrice, because I write and she gives me feedback and we can laugh. She can give me brutal feedback that I have to laugh or I would cry. And so I enjoy that. And my kids are part of it too. My children live relatively close to me. And so they read what I write and talk to me about it. And we have a really active group chat, text chat, and that's a ton of fun too. And so I still get the interaction. It's a little different. And like I said, if I'm telling the truth, which I'm trying to, I would admit, yeah, sometimes it's lonely and I miss I'm not enough of an introvert that I want to live the isolated life of of a writer. And so I do, thank goodness I'm married. I hope she sticks with me. And I have the kids to interact with.
One thing I was curious, I'm sure you can't get into many details, and we totally understand client confidentiality must come first, but we were wondering if you had any crazy experiences that you could share from your time being a lawyer in the corporate world.
Hmm.
I'm sure you were never framed for murder, but
I was never, there were no murders at either of the companies that I worked at. I, I can actually, I'll tell you one of my first experiences in the private sector that I still remember like it was yesterday. I knew nothing about the aerospace business. It came out of the Justice Department. And the CEO who hired me, who's a wonderful person and I admire very much, said, look, you need to learn the business. I said, okay, I've been reading a lot, doing whatever I can. He said, look, grab a plane and go all around the country and see the work. I'm like, grab a plane. What does he mean by that? And so I told my executive assistant, look, I'm going to, next few weeks, I need to travel a lot. And let me start with, and I remember, it's funny because you and I both went to William and Mary, but the features in that story, because there was a facility, the first one I was going to go visit was down in the peninsula area of Virginia. And I said, well, I'll either drive, because it was in the DC area, or I can fly to Norfolk and then rent a car. And I'm telling her this, and she looks at me and she says, we're in the airplane business. You're going to fly on a company plane. I said, oh, okay. And so I go out to Dulles to the private air terminal and I get on the company plane. I'm the only one on the plane, except as a steward. So I was very awkward because I was supposed to, should I ask him to do something? I don't know. And so the tiny flight, it lands at the airport right by Williamsburg, between Williamsburg and Newport News. And I come down somebody opens the stairs and I come down the stairs and there's a literal red carpet at the bottom of the stairs and a black town car. And there's a man standing next to the town car holding a cup of Starbucks coffee. And he says, just a little cream. Is that right, Mr. Comey? And I said, yes, it is. And I started to go get in the passenger seat, in the front seat. And he said, no, sir, you're right in the back. So I go get in the back. And I remember texting my family, like, I'm not in Kansas anymore. Wow. I flew to Williamsburg from Washington, and there's a guy giving me coffee. So that I felt like an imposter, still feel like an imposter when I think about those times. That adjustment to the way that senior corporate executives live and travel in the United States was strange to me. And again, I felt like a tourist. And then the rest of none of it is as exciting as my work in the private sector. I mean, in the public sector. Obviously, as a lawyer, you deal with in a company, your most exciting things are HR. Believe it or not, all the failings and crazy things that human beings do. But I can't tell you any of that.
no,
Yeah.
don't get in trouble. No, that's so funny. It didn't make you take the Amtrak down from DC.
I was going to drive my own car down from DC. I mean, why wouldn't I?
Crazy.
You talk about how some of this stuff may not be as attention grabbing as the stuff in the public sector. I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about the crime that Nora is brought down there to investigate and how it actually may be more serious than it may appear to some people at first glance?
Yeah, Nora is hired by this investment manager because they're worried about front running, which is a real thing in the investment management business, a concern about that. And what front running is if you are managing people's money for individuals or for a pension fund, you obviously want to buy and sell stock and other more sophisticated financial instruments. But if people find out you're about to buy or about to sell, they can sneak into the marketplace and benefit from the fact that your sale will, even if momentarily, drive the stock price down, and your purchase, especially if you're buying thousands and thousands of shares, may drive the stock price of a company up. So if you know that information about somebody, you can get in, either buy just before they do or sell just after they do, and you will be able to make money. It doesn't seem like you can make a lot, but actually, when you're talking about trades that are millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of securities, if somebody knows where you're going, they can make a ton of money from it. And so in the financial investment world, there's a lot of attention spent to protecting the information so that your brokers who may be executing the trades or your financial institution that may be involved in the trades is not telling anyone what you're doing. And you're trying sometimes to spread out your trades so that people don't notice that it's you, a big investment money manager, doing something. And if it gets out, if it starts to happen to you, front running, and it gets out that it's being done to you, it can really hurt your reputation. And obviously this is fictionalized. This didn't happen to me in my employment, but I know it's a big enough concern in the industry that I've made it part of this particular mystery.
In your time in the public sector, did you do any sort of have any cases where you had to sort of dig into these sort of white collar financial crimes that can kind of have a really big impact, even though they don't necessarily always get the same headlines as, say, like a more, like a murder or kidnapping or something like that?
Yes. And most prominently when I was the U.S. attorney in Manhattan after 9/11, we had an explosion of corporate fraud cases. And so we were investigating enormous companies that people may still remember the names of. Enron, I indicted Martha Stewart and other people associated with a company in which she had engaged in stock transactions. And so it was really the only time in my career where these kind of cases were sexy. They were being followed not just by the Financial Times, but the New York Post was writing about it. Not always well, as you might imagine, but they were being covered by lots and lots of media because there was a sense that we're having a run on corporate fraud in the United States. And we felt tremendous pressure to make cases and then tell the people of the United States about the cases so they knew that the system wasn't corrupt. And if there were bad actors or bad companies, we were going to hold them accountable. So I did a fair amount of that work.
Why do you think that time period was such a big boom for that sort of work? Were there just a lot of people like, let's do fraud, or was it something that was like the government's kind of like, okay, we need to tamp down on this in a pretty big way?
I think it was mostly connected to conditions in the marketplace. Warren Buffett had this awesome expression. I hope I get it right. He said, just as a rising tide lifts all boats, a quickly receding tide exposes all naked bathers. And so what had happened in the late 90s into the early 2000s is the tech sector in particular had gone crazy. And we had a boom where any stock that you could say was a tech stock sold tremendously, and the price ran up and up and up. And there were a lot of legitimate companies doing good work, but there were companies who were not able to meet the expectations of their shareholders. They lost their suit in the water. And so rather than raising their hand and saying, I need a towel, I have to come out, they were swimming naked. And what that means is they were lying about how many products they were shipping. They were lying about how many ads they were selling on their programs, that sort of thing. And then the tech sector crashed. And when it crashed, it exposed a lot of naked bathers, a lot of people who had been lying to their shareholders and to the marketplace. And those were, I used to say, it sounded creepy, so I stopped saying it publicly, but I used to say, those naked bathers, those are the people I want. And so we would look for those kinds of things and then try to send a very strong message of deterrence that these are not victimless crimes and people are going to be held seriously responsible for this.
Another thing I really enjoy about your writing is obviously there's really interesting, well-drawn characters. There's a compelling plot that just grabs you and grips you. But in addition, because as we said, you've lived in this world, you're able to throw in little observations here and there. And I wanted to read something that jumped out at me. You said, really rich people know on some level that chance, pure luck, played a big role in their success. And they deal with that in one of two ways. Some hold on to a sense of guilt and compensate by trying to help other people. Most submerge it by telling themselves they are uniquely talented and deserve the money. And I thought that was a really interesting observation that comes from somebody who's obviously spent some time around very wealthy people. So can you discuss that, or maybe tell us about your time with the wealthy people?
Yeah, that was news to me because I didn't grow up. My family didn't have money. We were fine, middle-class people. And it wasn't until I left government and went into corporate America that I started to rub elbows with rich folks. and was struck by that, right? Anybody who's making, I don't know, $50 million a year is either supremely talented, a pitcher unlike any other pitcher. And there are those people, right? LeBron James, who I'm a fan of, deserves the money that he's paid. Caitlin Clark deserves to be paid a lot of money to play in Indianapolis. And because they have unique talents, most of the people in corporate America don't. Or if they have talent, it's also a lot of luck. They are where they are because of the way they looked, the way they sounded, who they knew, a break that came to them. And that was true of me. I mean, a big part of my success, I think, was I'm a tall white male who looks a certain way and is, I'm a nice enough looking person, but I'm not a Ryan Gosling who's going to throw you off and make you mad. And so those are unearned, right? That all those things about me. But I met a lot of people whose approach to life was my poop don't smell, and that I'm here, I'm making all this money because I deserve it. And the guy who's emptying my trash can is less than I. And so that's why he's paid minimum wage and I'm paid all this money. And I remember it really rubbed me the wrong way and made me notice the ones, and I met the ones who made a lot of money and whose attitude was, holy crap, why am I making all this money? I will take this money and do good with it because it's not about me, except in the sense that I'm a lucky person.
Absolutely. To kind of marry two topics we've been sort of talking about, when it comes to the financial crimes or financial misconduct, white collar crimes, and then that sort of culture that you discussed when it comes to the uber wealthy people who, have a lot of money. How can that contribute to sort of, basically a kind of a culture of non-accountability when it comes to people who might think that they're entitled to be above the law, be above, morality, and that's, I feel like somewhat of a theme in this work as well.
Yeah. Well, people, to make a lot of money and not have it influence you requires you to deal with a bit of cognitive dissonance, right? That I'm getting all this, but I don't fully deserve it. And as I said in the piece you read, that generates a sense of guilt. And a lot of people have trouble keeping that in their head. They want to suppress it in some way. But it's related to building an environment in which you will hear the truth. Because the best leaders I've ever worked for knew that they could be wrong and worried that they could be wrong up until the very moment they made a decision and even afterwards. And that meant they wanted good advice. They wanted to be told when they were too close to the line, when they were making mistakes. Well, the people who suppress the dissonance also suppress any sense of humility. And so it becomes very difficult for them to be told the truth because they don't want it, especially if it reveals they're making a mistake or they're about to make a mistake. And so those are the people that they're blind, willfully blind in a way, right? They shut down criticism, they shut down information inconsistent with what they already believe. And that's just a tiny step from that into lying to your shareholders, lying to your investors. Because the other thing that I noticed in the investigating the corporate fraud cases is people would tell themselves a story like, yeah, I'm lying about how much advertising we're selling on our program, but I'm a noble leader and I'm leading a valuable enterprise. And so it's necessary to make sure that this enterprise survive. So they tell themselves that story. And so all of those threads are, to my mind, in the same rope of arrogance and lack of humility.
Yeah, it's very Elizabeth Holmes Theranos kind of, we need to save the world with this company. So that means lying to make sure the company survives. And it's like, no, that's not
Yeah, I'm doing good. And look, it's a problem with prosecutors and law enforcement, right? Because you're engaged in business, you're trying to put away a bad person. And so in the quiet of a Saturday afternoon, when you're going through files to see if there's things you need to turn over to the defense, there's a real danger that, especially a younger prosecutor, but any prosecutor will look at something that could hurt their case and think, I'm on a noble mission. This person is guilty. And so I don't know whether I should turn this over because it wouldn't be just, without realizing what that justice is a larger concept that they're bound to. And so I don't want to suggest that people in government are immune to those kind of forces. I think it's a universal human problem.
How can people resist temptations like that?
Two things. First, by being wrapped in a culture and where the unspoken assumptions are, we don't care about any particular case. We care about serving a system, and we are servants of a system that's only just if we act in a certain way. Second, fear to reinforce that culture. So think of it as the positive culture is a field. The fear is an electrified fence around the field, so that if you stray out, you're going to be hurt. You're going to be shocked, that there will be severe punishment for withholding of information that ought to be turned over to the defense, career ruining type of stuff. But I can remember when I first became U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, I discovered that a tradition that I had grown up with as a young prosecutor, which was every trial, no matter the result, you go see the boss. What had happened, I noticed by the time I became U.S. Attorney, is that it had drifted to only convictions were coming to see me. And that scared me, because that risked, I thought, sending a message to a young prosecutor on that Saturday afternoon. The boss cares about convictions only. And so it undercuts the culture you want to send, the cultural message you want to send. And so I said, no, everyone will come. And I especially embraced cases that had ended in not guilty verdicts. After asking, tell me about this case, tell me why this was a case that we needed to bring, then I would say, thank you, because justice sometimes requires you taking a swing. This sexual assault case is very difficult, but thank you for bringing it. This is what justice is about. Now, if someone came back multiple times with acquittals, I'd have a whole other conversation. But you can see what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to spot what the culture is and make sure that I'm reinforcing it in a good way to make sure that we stay on track.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like in a culture, the fear of failure can be more, I guess, overpowering to the point where like people are so scared to make mistakes or acknowledge just failures that it can kind of undermine any sort of risk taking, even risks that might be necessary because it's the right thing to do, obviously.
Yeah, and closely related to that is people's ability to convince themselves that they're right and their difficulty being wrong. I mean, the cases I've been involved in that involved innocent people going to prison were all cases that involved good investigators and good prosecutors who were, just like the rest of us, deeply flawed humans. They saw something, they believed they had it right, and that made it impossible for them to see alternatives. And even when confronted with evidence that the person was innocent, they would react angrily because the mistake was a threat to their very identity. That's something we all struggle with as humans, being wrong. And it's a big part of the criminal justice system, making sure when you're trying to build a culture that you take that into account. People are this way, including yourself.
I mean, of course, this novel is about Nora working in corporate law where you worked. I'm curious, is there anything that you miss about working in the corporate law field?
I loved the jobs I had because I learned a ton about worlds I knew nothing about. I remember when the recruiter called me when I was at Lockheed Martin to recruit me to come work in the investment management world. And she asked me, did I know anything about it? And I said, no. And she said, well, if you were in the financial space, you would know. And I said, well, I'm not. I'm in the rockets and airplane and helicopter business. And so I don't know anything about it. And so that I love learning new things. And so that was something I really enjoyed doing. That said, I meant what I said. I don't want to insult people who make a lot of money in companies. That's fine. But it never animated me. And I can remember when I was leaving the investment manager, it was a cool place. I was really glad I went there. It was the kind of place where you did what I did. I sent an email to the whole workforce saying, I think I'm going to leave next year. And here's why. Because this is cool. I've learned a lot. It's really interesting, but I don't get great joy out of the markets. I can remember an executive coming to me and saying, so do you have enough? I said, what do you mean? He said, do you have enough money that you never need to work again? And I said, no, is that the standard? Is that the standard? No, but you can tell in just the question how central money was to that person. And that's okay. It just wasn't to me. And so I don't miss, even though I enjoyed it, I was glad I was there and learned a lot. I don't miss corporate America.
I was curious, you left. It's interesting, and you mentioned, worrying that you burned so many bridges, maybe it wouldn't be possible, but you did end up going back to public service, to government. And what about public service draws people like yourself back into it, even though it's way less lucrative and convenient than sort of the private side of things? What about it animated you to make you want to go back to it?
You get paid, not a lot, but you get paid to try to help people who need you. The FBI's job is to rescue the taken, protect the vulnerable, the bullied, the picked on, the terrorized. And that's a pretty cool way to make a living. It's an exhausting way to make a living, but the job has, it's true. I bet it sounds snobby to people, but the job has moral content, right? You're not supposed to do anything that's not, you do because you're humans, you make mistakes, but you're supposed to make every decision asking, is this the right thing to do? Is this consistent with the law? And am I being a good person here? And in the private sector, whether you're a law firm or a lawyer at a company, your job is to advise the company or your client about risk. And I did criminal defense work. It's incredibly important and unbelievably hard. Among the reasons that it's hard is your job is not to do what you think is right. Your job is to make the best argument you can for your client. And I represented people. I did not represent anyone that I believed to be innocent, thank God. But that's terrifying work. Your job is to try to help this person. Your ethical responsibility is to make every argument that can reasonably be made, even if you don't fully believe it, to try and help this client. That's hard. And it's much easier to be on the government side of things, where you better not have words come out of your mouth that you don't fully believe. You better not make arguments that aren't the best, the closest to the facts and the law. And so having the freedom to be that is what makes government such a cool place to work. And as I said, it's a hard place to work, but I loved it. And you were right. I never expected to go back. And when the Attorney General called me and asked me would I come down and interview for FBI director, I said no, that I thought it'd be too much for my family. And then he kind of talked me into it. I told him I thought the answer would still be no, but then Patrice told me to go down and be interviewed. And then she said, they're not going to pick you anyway, but you go down there. She said she didn't want me moping around. I could have been the FBI director, and now I'm just a professor. And so I went down. I remember meeting with President Obama, and I walked out of the White House and I called her and I said, your faith in their judgment is misplaced, because I think he's going to ask me to do this and it's going to turn our lives upside down. And that part was true. But just if you're doing it right, your job is to help, and to help people who really need you and communities that need you. That's a cool way to make a living.
One thing I was curious about, since the novel is ultimately a story with financial crimes, white collar crimes at the heart of it, do you think that those kinds of crimes are taken seriously enough by our sort of system of justice right now, and law enforcement or whatnot, or do we have a ways to go when it comes to, safeguarding against that kind of crime?
I think they're taken seriously, but the playing field is tilted, because having worked a lot in the justice system, I know that the quality of justice varies in direct proportion to the quality of your lawyer, which is why it's so important that we have legal aid programs for indigent defendants. But business crimes are typically involve you investigating a company or individuals who have the resources to have lots of lawyers that really are able to make life hard for prosecutors and investigators. And so they're hard cases to investigate, because there is class and wealth and privilege makes a difference. And both in terms of the resources they can bring to bear, and then there's a certain fear that lays on prosecutors investigating, in my experience, investigating complex financial crimes involving prominent subjects, people, either individuals or companies. There's a fear of losing and being embarrassed that is not present in lots of other cases, because the subjects are represented by the same people who went to your kind of law school, your elite law schools. They may hang out at the same clubs you hang out with. I don't know, play golf at the same places you play at. And so there's a fear that I used to feel. And I once said it to a reporter, I called it the chicken shit club. And then he used what I said to be the title of his book, The Chicken Shit Club. But there's a chicken shitness to sometimes that infects prosecutions of powerful people. Again, sometimes for reasons you understand, sometimes for reasons that are harder to understand. A fear of loss, a fear of embarrassment, a fear of playing a game on national television, not having it come out well. And that makes it an uneven playing field in a lot of ways. To be poor and non-white in this country, none of those things are a factor in your prosecutions in the overwhelming main, those issues of power or embarrassment, but they are in investigations and prosecutions of financial crimes.
So your last book was, of course, your first novel. This is your second novel. I'm curious, was the process any easier this time around since you've done it before?
I guess in the sense that I had a better sense of what the painful parts would be and the hard parts would be. I liked, I think John Green described writing a novel as your first draft is a hunk of stone you pulled out of a quarry, and it's all the little chiseling that makes it a book. And so there's so much chiseling. First of all, getting feedback from so many people, most of whom are in my family, and so they love me enough to really be direct. And so accounting for all that feedback, going over it and over it yourself, and chiseling and chiseling and chiseling and shaping, that was harder the first time because it's almost like I didn't know when I was going to get out of it. Having been through it, I knew what the process was going to be like, and so it was easier that time. I really enjoyed it though, enough that I hope this is my job. I mean, I'm just finishing the third book now, and it's something that I really get joy out of. And so I think it's easier because I know where, like I said, where the pain points are, and I can anticipate them and push through them. And I hope that'll be the case going forward.
When we last spoke, I believe it was just before the publication of your first novel, and you're getting ready to meet some of your new peers in the mystery writing community. I'm just curious, what has that experience been like, joining that new community?
Well, it lit my imposter complex on fire. So to meet people, and I think my publisher told me, stop saying these are real writers, right? Because you're a real writer now. But yeah, I feel inadequate for the right reason around a lot of writers who've been successful. And so I tried, and also not to be a jerk. I was on a panel and with 4 or 5 other writers at the Mystery Writers, International Thriller Writers Convention. And the moderator, for some reason, asked some question about writing and called on me first. And I said, no, ask these people first. And so I went last, and I wasn't faking it. That's the way it should be. I mean, there's a lot. I'm new to this world. I work hard at it to try and get it right. And so it's been mostly intimidating, but they've been incredibly kind. The people who read my book, both of my books, and did blurbs, I asked the publisher for their addresses so I could write them a note and thank them. And he said, yeah, nobody does that. And I said, come on, these people, they took the time. And so I did that. And I found from their responses, they're really kind people. I gather, I don't know anything about this, but that I'm in a commercial fiction world, which sounds like a snobby thing for people to say about us. But in the so-called literary fiction world, I'm told that people are less kind. I don't know whether that's true or not, but people are kind in this world.
And I was wondering another craft question, just, when you're crafting a mystery, what comes first for you? Is it the setting? Is it like the victim? Is it the central mystery, like the death scene or whatever? I mean, what for you kind of is that launch point where you go, or does it depend on the story?
At least so far, it has been through conversation with my wife, with Patrice, visualizing the story. So the thing that happens, so what's the crime? Where does it happen? And who are my characters involved with it? And so it was when I started Westport, I had a vision that it'll open with a murder. Nora will have gone there, and here's how it will end. And then with that sort of, I know where I'm going to be driving. I once heard a writer describe it that way. I know I'm going to drive from here in DC to Omaha. All right. And who's going to be in the car? But then figuring out exactly the route and what to show readers is hard. But once I start with that, I know where I'm going to end up. I know what the overall trip's going to be. I don't know that I could do it the way I gather some writers do it, which is just a step at a time, drive a quarter mile at a time, not knowing exactly where they're going to end up. So I start with that overarching view. I hope that makes sense.
Does. That sounds like the Fast and Furious method, 1/4 mile at a time. I was curious, in terms of now that you have two novels under your belt, do you have any advice for people who might be aspiring mystery writers or might want to try their hat at that? What over the time that you've like learned and sort of had this experience, anything that comes to mind as far as good advice, as far as either writing or, just kind of getting it published?
I don't think I do, both because I'm so new and also I think my experience is privileged. That is because people knew who I was. I guess I'm still alive, who I am. And so I had a leg up that most people won't have. And so it's part of my imposter complex, but it's also a real advantage. So I think I was tremendously helped by my agent, Kirby Kim, because he could give me advice. He knew the genre and could give me advice early on my writing, and then also give me advice on where what publishing house might best fit me and what I was looking for. Because I was really craving people who would tell me when I suck. And one of the real challenges of, I guess it's true of all places, but of Washington, D.C. is people don't tell you when you suck because they're afraid. They don't ever want to burn a bridge. It connects to what we were talking about before as the boss of a company or a team trying to get people to tell you the truth. And so I really wanted people who would not blow smoke at me. And so having a good agent who would tell me the truth and then find me places that might be a good match publishing wise for the same reason. But my experience is so weird that I don't presume to give people advice about this.
Before we wrapped up, you kind of casually mentioned a third book about Nora. Can you give us any non-spoiler hints or suggestions of what might be next for Nora?
Or beyond any other writing projects?
Yeah, I think that, what can I tell people? I want to tell a story in the third book that's back in Manhattan, the theme of which is white identity extremism. So domestic extremism by white people, which is a significant issue in this country, something I know a lot about from the FBI, and have it be current, so modern day, involving the U.S. Attorney's Office. And my characters will be around. I mean, Carmen might become the U.S. Attorney, and she might want Nora to be her deputy, the number 2. And so the characters will get a little bit older, but the Quran will actually work and show people a different kind of case in a different, with familiar characters. And then I don't know where to go next, actually. And so I'm trying to decide, should I keep going? Should I write a prequel? Because a lot of people have asked me about the backstory of Benny and Nora's relationship. And so I don't know the answer to that yet. And there's other places I'd like to take readers. I mean, I have a lot of stories in my head, as you might imagine, from Washington, D.C., and I lived in Richmond, Virginia for 9 years and was a prosecutor. And so I have Virginia stories that I think would be really interesting to people. And so we'll see. And also don't know, is it best to have these characters, let's say a Nora, promoted to a job at the Justice Department in Washington, and that's the vehicle to tell DC stories? Or should I start a separate set of characters and a separate storyline there? I don't know the answer yet.
You could start a Comey-verse, kind of link them together. Cameo. That's really fun.
It sounds very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that book. We love the first two, and we'll go wherever you go.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for taking the time. This was terrific.
Is there
you're great as always. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Is there anything we didn't ask you about before we conclude that you wanted to mention, or anything would be important for our listeners to understand about any of this that we've talked about?
I don't think so. I think you covered it. That was fun.
Awesome.
Thank you. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I didn't realize I was throwing in a Caitlin Clark Indianapolis plug. As the words are coming out of my mouth, I remembered where you are.
And John Green, you were quoting John.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's a very Indiana coded.
It really was.
So you really prepared.
Shameless Hoosier plugging.
Yeah.
There you go. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much.
And so hopefully we'll see you again next year and talk about the third one.
Yes.
I'd love to. Yeah,
Okay.
Be well. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too. Bye.
Thanks to James Comey for speaking with us again. We always enjoy having him on the show. We will include a link to order both of his novels in our show notes. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
Summers in New Jersey were made to wow you. From sun and wows to fun and wows, chill and wows to thrill and wows. So come see what your wow's gonna be. New Jersey, it's one summer wow after another after another. Find your wow at visitnj.org. New Jersey, little state, lot of wow.